The social worker's hands were shaking when she told me the orphanage had burned my files on purpose, and the only person who knew the truth about my parents was dying on a farm 300 miles away. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button right now. Tomorrow, I'm sharing a story that's going to absolutely wreck you in the best way possible. I was 21 years old, standing in the parking lot of Meadowbrook Children's Home with everything I owned stuffed into a backpack and one torn duffel bag. It was March 15th, 2023, the day I officially aged out of the system. I'd been at Meadowbrook since I was 4 years old, and in that entire time, nobody had ever come looking for me. No relatives, no friends of the family, nobody. I was the kid everyone forgot about. Mrs. Chen, wait, no, Mrs. Roberts had been my caseworker for the last 6 years. She was the kind woman with tired eyes who always remembered my birthday, even when I pretended not to care. That morning, she met me in her office one last time to go over my exit paperwork. "Maya," she said quietly, sliding a thin folder across her desk. "There's something I need to tell you before you leave. Something that's been bothering me for years." I looked at the folder. It was barely a quarter-inch thick, way too thin for 21 years of life. "What is it?" She hesitated, her fingers drumming nervously on the desk. "Your file should be much thicker than this. When children come into the system, especially as young as you were, there's usually documentation. Birth certificates, medical records, notes from the social workers who removed you from your home, information about your parents. But yours has almost nothing. I'd always known my file was sparse. I'd asked to see it when I turned 18, hoping for answers about where I came from. All it contained was basic information, found abandoned at a church when I was approximately 4 years old. No identification, no family located, placed into state care. That was it. "I did some digging," Mrs. Roberts continued, her voice dropping even lower. "About 8 years ago, there was a fire in the records room at the old Meadowbrook building before they moved to this location. The official report said it was electrical, but Maya, I found something odd. Only certain files were destroyed in that fire. Yours was one of them. And when I looked into it further, I discovered that the fire happened just 3 days after a man came asking questions about you." My heart started pounding. "What man?" "His name was Thomas Bradford. He was a farmer from a town called Millfield, about 300 miles north of here. He came to the orphanage claiming he had information about your family. He wanted to see you, but the director at the time, Mr. Holloway, refused to let him visit. He said there was no proof of any family connection and that it would be disruptive to your care. Thomas left his contact information and said he'd be back with documentation. Then 3 days later, the fire happened and all the original records about your intake were destroyed." I couldn't breathe. "Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't anyone tell me before?" Mrs. Roberts looked genuinely pained. "I only discovered this a few months ago when I was trying to help you prepare for aging out. I wanted to find anything that might help you, any family connections, any history. When I found the incident report about Thomas Bradford and saw the timing of the fire, I started asking questions. Mr. Holloway retired 5 years ago, but I tracked him down. Maya, he wouldn't talk to me. He hung up the phone as soon as I mentioned Thomas Bradford's name. That's when I knew something was very wrong." She pulled out another piece of paper. "I found Thomas Bradford's address. He still lives in Millfield, on a farm that's been in his family for generations. I called him 2 weeks ago. He's 87 years old now, and he's sick. Cancer. When I told him you were about to age out, he started crying. He said he's been waiting for 18 years to tell you the truth about your family. My hands were shaking as I took the paper with his address. What truth? Who am I? He wouldn't tell me over the phone. He said it's too important, that you need to hear it directly from him. But Maya, he said your family story is buried under the barn on his property. I don't know what that means, but he insisted you'd understand when you got there. I left Meadowbrook that afternoon with $350 in my pocket, a bus ticket to Millfield, and more questions than I'd ever had in my life. Mrs. Roberts had bent the rules and given me some money from a discretionary fund meant to help kids transitioning out of care. It wasn't much, but it would get me to Millfield and maybe pay for a few nights in a cheap motel. The bus ride took almost 7 hours with 2 transfers. I spent the entire time staring out the window, trying to imagine what I'd find. Why had my files been burned? Why had Mr. Holloway prevented Thomas from seeing me? And what did he mean by my family story being buried under a barn? Millfield turned out to be one of those tiny farming towns that seemed frozen in time. Main Street had maybe a dozen buildings, a general store, a diner, a post office, and a couple of churches. I got off the bus at 4:30 in the afternoon and walked into the diner because I was starving and had no idea where else to go. The woman behind the counter looked to be in her 60s, with gray hair and a friendly smile. "You look lost, honey. Just passing through?" "Actually, I'm looking for someone. Thomas Bradford? He has a farm around here." Her expression changed immediately, becoming more guarded. "You family?" "Maybe. I'm not sure. He asked me to come see him." She studied me for a long moment, then her eyes widened slightly. "Oh my God, you're the girl, the one he's been waiting for." She came around the counter and grabbed my hand. "I'm Helen, Helen Bradford. Thomas is my brother-in-law. Come on, I'll drive you out to the farm. He's been talking about you nonstop since he got that phone call." 20 minutes later, we pulled up a long dirt driveway to a weathered farmhouse surrounded by fields. The barn Helen had mentioned was massive and old, its red paint faded to a dull rust color. As we got out of the car, an elderly man appeared on the porch, leaning heavily on a cane. Even from a distance, I could see he was frail, his body bent with age and illness. But when he saw me, his face transformed. Tears started streaming down his weathered cheeks, and he raised one shaking hand to his mouth. "Sarah," he whispered. "Oh my God, you look just like Sarah." Helen helped him down the porch steps as I approached. Up close, Thomas looked even more fragile, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He reached out and touched my face gently, like he was making sure I was real. "Who's Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother," he said. "Sarah Bradford, my daughter." The world tilted. "Your daughter? But I don't understand. Why didn't you take me? Why was I in an orphanage?" "Come inside," Thomas said. "I need to sit down, and you need to hear the whole story." Helen settled Thomas into a comfortable chair in the living room and brought us both coffee. Then she excused herself, saying this was a conversation we needed to have alone. I sat across from Thomas, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, waiting. "Your mother was my only child," Thomas began, beautiful, smart, stubborn as hell. She married a man named Daniel when she was 23. I didn't approve of him. He was charming, but there was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Sarah wouldn't listen to my concerns. She was in love. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. They had you 3 years later. You were the light of Sarah's life. She brought you here to the farm all the time. You loved the animals, especially the barn cats. You'd spend hours out there playing. What happened to them? I asked, though part of me was afraid to know. Thomas's face darkened. Daniel was involved in some bad business. I never knew the details, but there were men looking for him, dangerous men. When you were 3 years old, someone set fire to their house in the middle of the night. Sarah and Daniel both died in that fire. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They died in a fire? The official report said it was an electrical fire, just like what they said about your orphanage records, but I knew better. Those men killed them, and I think Daniel knew they were coming because he'd made arrangements. That very morning, before the fire, he'd brought you here to the farm, said you were going to spend a few days with Grandpa while he and Sarah dealt with some business. You were so excited, carrying your little pink backpack with your favorite stuffed rabbit inside. Tears were streaming down my face. Then why didn't you keep me? Why did I end up in an orphanage? Because I tried to protect you, Thomas said, his own voice breaking. 2 days after your parents died, those same men showed up here. They asked about you, said they knew Daniel had a daughter, and they wanted to make sure all loose ends were tied up. I lied. I told them you'd been in the house during the fire, that you'd died with your parents. They searched the farm, but I'd hidden you in the storm cellar under the barn. You were so scared, crying for your mama. I had to keep you quiet. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. After they left, Thomas continued, I knew I couldn't keep you here. If they ever found out you were alive, they'd come back. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I drove you to Meadowbrook Children's Home in the middle of the night and left you on the steps of the church next door with a note saying you'd been abandoned. I used a fake name, gave them no information that could trace back to me or your parents. I thought I was saving your life. But you came back, I said. Mrs. Roberts said you came back asking about me 18 years ago. Thomas nodded. Those men, they all ended up dead or in prison within 5 years. Their whole organization collapsed. Once I knew the danger had passed, I tried to find you. It took me 3 years to figure out which orphanage you'd been placed in. When I finally tracked you down and went to Meadowbrook, I was so excited. I had all your mother's things saved, photos, documents, everything to prove you were my granddaughter. But they wouldn't let you see me. Mr. Holloway said I had no legal standing. He said that without proper documentation, without going through official channels, there was no way to prove any family connection. He told me to leave and threatened to call the police if I tried to contact you directly. I left my information and said I'd come back with a lawyer, with DNA tests, with whatever I needed. But before I could do any of that, I got a call saying there'd been a fire at Meadowbrook and all your original intake records had been destroyed. When I tried to follow up, Mr. Holloway had my calls blocked. He made it impossible for me to reach you. I was crying hard now, years of loneliness and confusion pouring out. Why would he do that? Why would he keep us apart? I don't know for certain, Thomas said. But over the years I've heard stories about Mr. Holloway, about children whose family members tried to claim them, only to be turned away on technicalities, about files that went missing or were destroyed. I think he was involved in something corrupt, maybe taking money to keep certain children in the system, maybe something worse. I hired a private investigator 5 years ago who found evidence that Mr. Holloway had taken bribes from adoption agencies, from people who wanted to traffic children. But by then he'd retired, moved away, and the statute of limitations had passed on most of his crimes. My whole body was shaking with rage and grief. All those years, all that time, I'd spent believing I had no one, and my grandfather had been fighting to find me. I never stopped thinking about you, Thomas said softly. I kept everything of your mother's, everything of yours, from when you were little. It's all preserved under the barn, in a room I built specifically to keep it safe. Your mother's journals, photo albums, your baby clothes, her wedding dress, medical records, birth certificates, everything you'd need to know who you really are. I couldn't risk keeping it in the house in case someone came looking. So I built a hidden room under the barn floor, waterproofed and sealed. Your family story is buried there, waiting for you. He struggled to his feet, and I jumped up to help him. Come with me. I want to show you before it's too late. We walked slowly across the yard to the barn, Thomas leaning heavily on both his cane and my arm. Inside, the barn smelled like hay and animals and old wood. He led me to the back corner where empty feed bags were stacked against the wall. "Help me move these," he said. Together we shifted the bags, revealing a trapdoor set into the floor. It had a combination lock on it. Thomas's hands shook as he dialed in the numbers. Your mother's birthday, June 23rd, 1979. The lock clicked open. I pulled up the heavy door, revealing a set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. Thomas flicked a switch and lights came on below. The room underneath was about 10 feet by 10 feet with concrete walls and floor. Along one wall were shelves filled with plastic bins, all carefully labeled. Along another wall was a filing cabinet, and in the center of the room was a wooden hope chest. "This is your inheritance," Thomas said from the top of the stairs. His health wouldn't let him climb down. "Everything your mother wanted you to have. Everything you need to know about who you are." I descended the stairs slowly, my heart pounding. The first bin I opened was labeled Maya Baby Ears. Inside were tiny clothes, a pink blanket, the stuffed rabbit Thomas had mentioned, and dozens of photographs. Me as a baby, me learning to walk, me covered in birthday cake on my first birthday. And in every photo there was a woman who looked exactly like me, holding me, laughing with me, looking at me with pure love. My mother. I spent the next 2 hours in that room while Thomas rested in the barn above. I went through everything. My mother's high school yearbooks where she'd written about her dreams of being a teacher, her college degree in elementary education, her wedding album showing her and my father on what should have been the happiest day of their lives, her journals where she wrote about her pregnancy with me, about how scared and excited she was, about how she promised to always protect me. I found my birth certificate, Maya Sarah Wells, born April 7th, 2002. Mother, Sarah Elizabeth Bradford. Father, Daniel James Wells. I had a full name. I had a birthday. I had a history. There were letters, too, dozens of them, that my mother had written to me but never sent. Letters she'd planned to give me when I was older. In one, written just a month before she died, she wrote, "My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, then something has happened to your daddy and me. I need you to know that everything we did, every choice we made, was to try to keep you safe. Your daddy made some mistakes before we met, got involved with some bad people. He's been trying to make it right, but I'm afraid those people won't let us go. If the worst happens, remember that we loved you more than anything in this world. Be strong, be brave, and never forget who you are." In the filing cabinet, I found evidence of Daniel's involvement with a criminal organization, documents he'd apparently been collecting to turn over to the police. Bank records, names, photos, proof of money laundering, and fraud. He'd been planning to testify to bring them all down. That's why they'd killed him. And in the hope chest, I found Sarah's most precious possessions. Her grandmother's wedding ring, a locket with pictures of her parents, a quilt she'd made while pregnant with me, each square embroidered with a different hope for my future. Teacher, artist, musician, traveler, loved, happy, safe. When I finally climbed back up the stairs, Thomas was sitting on a hay bale, looking exhausted but peaceful. "Did you find what you needed?" "I found everything," I said, sitting beside him. "But I don't understand why you kept all of this hidden. Why didn't you try harder to reach me?" "I did try," he said quietly. "Every year on your birthday, I sent a card to Meadowbrook with my return address, hoping you'd get it. They all came back marked Return to Sender. I hired lawyers who told me I had no case without documentation, and the documentation had been destroyed. I even showed up at Meadowbrook 3 more times, but security escorted me off the property before I could see you. Eventually, I had to accept that the system had won, that they'd successfully erased your history. But you kept everything safe. I promised your mother I'd take care of you. When I couldn't do that in person, I did it the only way I could. I preserved your past so that someday, when you were old enough to come looking, you'd find the truth." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Thomas said, "The farm is yours if you want it. It's been in the Bradford family for 4 generations. I have no other children, no other family. Everything I have goes to you when I die. And Maya, that's going to be soon. The doctors give me maybe 3 months." My throat tightened. "I just found you. I can't lose you already." "I know, sweetheart, but I've made my peace with it. I got to see you again, got to tell you the truth, got to know that Sarah's daughter survived and grew into a beautiful young woman. That's more than I'd hoped for." Over the next 2 months, I moved into Thomas's farmhouse and learned everything I could about my family. Helen visited daily, cooking meals and sharing stories about Sarah's childhood. I met neighbors who remembered my mother, who told me I had her smile and her stubbornness. Thomas showed me how to run the farm, though he knew I probably wouldn't keep it as a working operation. He introduced me to his lawyer, David, who'd been helping him prepare for this moment. The will was ironclad. The farm, the land, and a savings account with $90,000 all went to me. Thomas had been saving for years, knowing that someday he'd need to provide for me. "Use it wisely," he told me. "Go to college if you want, see the world, or stay here and build a life on this land. Your mother would have wanted you to have choices. I spent long evenings reading my mother's journals aloud to Thomas, and he'd add his own memories to her stories. I learned that she'd been funny and creative, that she'd loved to paint, that she'd dreamed of opening her own art school someday. I learned that my father had been kind but troubled, trying desperately to escape his past mistakes. I learned that they'd loved each other and loved me with everything they had. Thomas died on a Tuesday morning in late May, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch watching the sunrise. Helen found him an hour later when she came by with breakfast. He looked peaceful, like he'd simply gone to sleep. At his funeral, half the town showed up. People I'd never met shared stories about Thomas Bradford, about his kindness and integrity, about how he'd helped so many people over the years. I stood at his grave and thanked him for never giving up on me, for keeping my history safe, for giving me back my name and my story. Mrs. Roberts drove up from the city for the funeral and cried when she saw me standing there, surrounded by community and family history. "You found your way home," she said, hugging me tight. After Thomas died, I had decisions to make. The farm was mine, but I had no idea how to run it. David, the lawyer, suggested I lease the land to a neighboring farmer and keep the house and barn for myself. That's what I decided to do. I converted part of the barn into an art studio, fulfilling my mother's dream in my own way. I enrolled in online classes at the community college, studying art therapy and social work. And I started volunteering at a youth center in town, working with kids who'd been through trauma, who'd lost parents, who felt lost and forgotten like I had been. I kept the room under the barn exactly as Thomas had left it, but I added to it. I put my own journals there, my college acceptance letters, photos of my new life in Millfield. I wanted any future generations of Bradfords to know the whole story, to understand what we'd survived and overcome. Helen became like a grandmother to me. She taught me to cook Sarah's favorite recipes, showed me where my mother had carved her name in a tree when she was 8 years old, helped me understand what it meant to be part of this community and this family. One afternoon, about a year after Thomas died, I was cleaning out the attic in the farmhouse when I found a box of old VHS tapes. I dragged Thomas's ancient VCR out of storage and plugged it in, curious about what might be on them. The first tape I played nearly stopped my heart. It was my 3rd birthday party. There I was, a tiny girl with pigtails and a pink dress, blowing out candles on a cake. And there was Sarah, my mother, young and beautiful and alive, singing happy birthday and laughing as I smashed my face into the cake. Daniel was there too, filming and making jokes, his voice warm and loving. I watched all 15 tapes over the next week, seeing my parents alive and happy and real for the first time. I saw myself learning to ride a bike, playing in the sprinkler, having tea parties with stuffed animals. I saw Christmas mornings and summer barbecues and ordinary moments that had been preserved by chance. In the last tape, dated just 2 weeks before they died, Sarah spoke directly to the camera. Daniel was filming, and she'd obviously asked him to record a message. "Maya, baby, if you're watching this, then something's happened to Daddy and me. I need you to know that we love you so much. You are the best thing we ever did, the only thing we got completely right. Be brave, baby girl, be strong, and know that wherever we are, we're watching over you, and we're so proud of you." I sat in that attic and cried for hours, mourning the parents I'd lost, the childhood that had been stolen from me, the years I'd spent believing I was unwanted and alone. But I also felt grateful, grateful that Thomas had saved my history, that he'd fought for me, even when the system worked against him, that he'd lived long enough to give me back my name and my story. I thought about Mr. Holloway, about the fire that had destroyed my records, about the corruption that had kept me and Thomas apart. David had filed complaints with the state, and there was an ongoing investigation into Meadowbrook's practices during Holloway's tenure. Several other families had come forward with similar stories of being blocked from claiming their relatives. It was too late for me and Thomas, too late for all the years we should have had together. But maybe it wouldn't be too late for other kids, other families who were being kept apart by a broken system. On the 2-year anniversary of arriving in Millfield, I organized a community event at the farm. We invited foster kids from all over the region, current and former, and their families if they had them. Helen helped me set up tables in the yard, and the whole town contributed food and time. I gave a speech about my story, about how Thomas had saved my history when the system tried to erase it. I talked about the importance of preserving family stories, of fighting for the truth, of never giving up on the people we love. "This farm is proof that our stories matter," I said to the crowd, "that we matter. The system tried to make me disappear, tried to erase my history and my family. But one old farmer refused to let that happen. He kept my mother's journals and my baby pictures and my birth certificate safe under his barn floor for 18 years, waiting for the day I'd be old enough to find my way home." After the event, a young woman about my age approached me. "My name is Jennifer," she said. "I aged out of Meadowbrook 3 years ago. They told me I had no family, that my records had been lost in that same fire. But after hearing your story, I'm wondering if maybe that wasn't true. Do you think your lawyer could help me?" I took her hand and squeezed it. "Absolutely. Let me introduce you to David." Over the following year, David helped Jennifer and 4 other former Meadowbrook residents investigate their cases. 2 of them found living relatives who'd been blocked from contact. One discovered that her mother hadn't abandoned her like she'd been told, but had died trying to get her back from the system. Their stories were heartbreaking but important. Proof that what had happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. The state eventually shut down an investigation into Meadowbrook's practices, and several former administrators, including Mr. Holloway, faced charges. It didn't undo the damage that had been done, but it meant that future kids might not suffer the same fate. I think about Thomas every day. I talk to him sometimes when I'm working in the barn or watching the sunset from the porch. I tell him about the kids I'm helping, about the classes I'm taking, about how I'm using the story he preserved to make a difference. The farm isn't just my home now. It's become a gathering place for foster kids and adoptees who are searching for their histories. I've helped 6 young people track down family members, and I've let 3 of them stay in the farmhouse while they figured out their next steps, just like Thomas would have wanted. My mother's hope chest sits in my bedroom now. Sometimes I wrap myself in the quilt she made and read her journals and feel connected to her across time and death. She wanted me to be safe, happy, loved, and though it took 21 years and a lot of pain, I am all of those things now. The truth my grandfather buried under the barn saved me, not just the documents and photos, but the message behind them, that I was worth saving, that my story mattered, that somewhere someone had never stopped fighting for me, even when it seemed hopeless. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it touched you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I share these stories because they matter, because they remind us that we're never truly alone, that families come in all forms, and that the truth always finds a way. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever discovered something about your past that changed everything? Or maybe you've been kept from family because of a broken system. Your story matters, and this community wants to hear it. And before you go, click on one of the two stories on your screen right now. One is about a woman who discovered her grandmother's secret fortune, and the other is about a man who found his birth certificate hidden in his adoptive parents' attic. Both stories will leave you speechless, just like mine. Remember, your history is yours. Never let anyone erase it. Until next time, keep searching for the truth.